Good evening, everybody. It is the 5th of November, 2024. The time is 2100 hours. As part of the admin and dispatcher training, I want to continue. I actually thought that we would have come to the end of the series on the training. However, I feel it's necessary to add a very specific segment regarding missing persons. Even though I might have touched on the subject in the previous admin and dispatcher training, I want to just try and focus in a little bit deeper in maybe some of the other critical and crucial areas that not only group members, administrators, and dispatchers, or for the better word, login assistants, should consider moving forward, but in particular to other organizations such as CPFs and NGOs, etc., when it comes specifically to missing persons, but even more importantly to missing children or missing adults with vulnerabilities and children with vulnerabilities. I'm not going to go into much on the technical or the legal background on this, because I have already done the commentary and the opinion paper on sharing of information of missing persons on social media, and it is in the best interest of key role players and stakeholders to actually study that document in detail and to educate yourself with regards to what the actual law stipulates and how it applies. And then the same thing will apply when it comes to the POPI, or the Protection of Personal Information Act. And it is on this basis that this particular section, I want to briefly cover some of those topics, but I also want to cover some of the difficulties and caveats when it comes to actually sharing of information, and in particular children. And the first thing I want to say to everybody is quite simply this: ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to missing persons and missing children in particular, this emotional response is actually unacceptable. And for those of you that have undertaken some of the training or have listened to some of the previous training modules that I've done, you will have learned I do not beat about the bush. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. But there's a right and there is a wrong, and there's no gray area in between it in certain aspects. But one has to be able to weigh up the consequences of both the right and the wrong, and be able to navigate accordingly through the difficulties of both right and wrong, pros and cons. And therefore, I categorically state we have got to stop with the emotional response to missing children in particular. Yes, it is an emotional issue, but we as administrators, dispatchers, or non-government organizations that might be reaching out to assist, we need to behave and react and act in a professional manner. And by that, what I mean by that is, one, we've got to do it firstly in a neutral and impartial workspace. We cannot take one side or another side. We cannot consider one factor over another factor, like race, color, or creed. That is unacceptable. But we also cannot turn around and say, but it's a child, and because it's a child, everything goes. No, 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 no. That is where mistakes are made. To give you a simple analogy before I end off on this, will now be voice note number 61. We all know that according to our constitution, we have the right of expression. In other words, we can say anything we really want to. However, as far as the Constitution of South Africa is concerned, our rights are not absolute. In other words, one right cannot have precedence over another right. And by that, what we mean is everybody's got the right to shout fire. But you do not have the right to shout fire in a theater, for example, where you could cause a panic and a stampede resulting in the death of hundreds of people or injury of hundreds of people. And therefore, the right to life takes the preference over the right to expression. So there has to be a balance in what we are doing. And because it is a child, we need to act in a more urgent manner, but not an emotional manner. And that is a message I want to put out to everybody who listens to my voice notes. Right, let me move on. I'll try and do a 5-minute segment. Let's move on then with voice note number 62. Okay, voice note number 62, 5th of November 2024. It's now 21:07. We're continuing with the admin and dispatcher training, specifically with reference to missing persons. Now, when it comes to missing persons, there is a priority, and everybody needs to understand this. There is a priority of getting the information out into the public domain as quickly as possible. And take note, I said as quickly as possible. I did not say get it out into the public domain regardless of all other factors. I said get it out into the public domain as quickly as possible. And the reason for that is we need to weigh up the consequences of releasing certain information at certain times, especially with certain other aspects of a procedure or process has not been followed. Even though we could in actual fact have a situation where, for example, a child goes missing now, and we are notified of it within 30 minutes of the child going missing. There is a definite urgency to get the information out and to get boots on the ground and to have people have eyes on local centers and streets and public areas for the child, because the longer that we take to look for the child, the less chances there are of a found safe status, for example. So there is an urgency to get the information out as possible. However, there's a couple of things that we need to consider. Number one, the POPI Act does not apply to WhatsApp groups, generally speaking. Please take a particular note of that. However, when we get to CPFs, non-government organizations, other public and private bodies, and like I said, I'm not going to go into much explanation, but a private body is any, for example, NGO, ourselves as Disaster Relief CERT, we are, according to the POPI Act, responsible for protecting the information, the personal information we receive directly from the data subject. So that now is where the problem comes in. As an organization, whether you are a CPF, whether you are a public body, i.e. a Department of Home Affairs, SAPS officials, whatever, if a parent or family member is sharing that information with you, they have to explicitly give you permission before you can share it out into the public domain. Now, because the POPI Act doesn't apply, any information that is obtained from the public domain where it is released by the data subject, you may share it without permission. So what that means is when we look at missing persons, family members and caregivers, children, family members, parents in particular, the caregivers, in the case of a school, that would come upon, that responsibility would ultimately fall upon the school principal or the vice principal or any other official of the schooling environment, Department of Education, whatever their policies and procedures are, they will in actual fact be the ones that may authorize the release of certain information. So one needs to be careful as to where we are getting our information and how we are sharing our information. And I hope that just makes a little bit of sense there. So if you are, I'm going to call it a private body for the time being. There is a bit of question as to whether a CPF falls under a public body or a private body, but because of the fact that a CPF is actually constituted in terms of the police regulations, etc., what are they called, the extended regulations, they actually become a public body. And therefore, CPF patrollers in particular should never share information regarding missing persons until that CPF structure has received the information directly from the parents, or in the case of the parents having followed the procedures and it is made available into the public domain through the recognized flyers, for example, Pink Ladies, VCSI, Renegade Search and Rescue, Ground Zero Search and Rescue, National Missing Persons, and all the other organizations that release recognized flyers. So from an NGO and a CPF perspective, one has to be careful where we get our information and how we share our information. And then let's move on with 63. Okay, voice note number 63, 5th of November 2024, 21 hours 12. Moving on with voice note number 63, as I say, I want to have a look at what do we do then as an organization when we in actual fact do receive information, firstly directly from a family member or a parent. Well, what we have to do is we can gather all that information from a parent regarding a child, but we also need to have permission from the parent to share that information into the public domain before it goes out, which means that there is nothing stopping any non-government organization or any private body, as per the Act's definition of a private body, or of a public body. So CPF, for example, can create their own missing persons flyer and they can circulate it. But before you do that, make sure that you got permission, i.e. through your CPF chairman, that there is in actual fact a written permission or at least a verbal permission that you can in actual fact have something to fall back on in the event anything went off into a court of law, either on a criminal nature or on a civil nature. So always as a private body or public body, please, as I say, read the commentaries and what the Act says with regards to the POPI documents that I've done, as well as the missing person, to generate full understanding of what is actually transpiring. And I apologize, my voice note might be going da. I don't stutter. So once you've got that information, and you as a CPF in particular, you create a flyer, then you can put it out into the public domain. That isn't a problem. But there is one caveat that I'm going to make a suggestion on with regards to the supply of any flyers of any nature. And always remember that in the public's eye, an official organization, a NGO, a business, a CPF, a police station will always carry more weight than an average flyer that's just made out of anything. And we need to look at a couple of caveats with regards to circulating certain information and why it becomes dangerous to circulate certain information. And the very first thing I want to say to everybody, and I'll elaborate in the next voice note in more detail on this, whenever you as a private body or a public body are circulating a missing persons, a missing male persons, a missing female persons, that is a separate issue, a missing male or female with vulnerabilities, that is a third issue, a missing child, that's a fourth issue, and a missing child with vulnerabilities, that's also another issue altogether. I've actually broken it down into 6 different categories, and each category needs to be dealt with accordingly. So whenever you as a private body or public body create a missing persons flyer, you need to ensure that you do not supply a family member's telephone contact number on that flyer. Please, people, whatever you do, if you don't listen to any further voice notes, listen to the next one, which I think is number 64, and fully grasp the concept of what transpires here, because it is crucial. Whatever you do, do not share any a family member or parent's telephone number. And following today's case, definitely not a school principal or staff member's number. Let me explain it in detail in the next one. Right, voice note number 64 on the 5th of November 2024, time is 21:16. I said in the last voice note, do not share family member, parents, other entities like school principals, staff members, telephone numbers. As an NGO, look guys, even as a CPF, it might be advisable to register and RICA a separate telephone number, really. One that can be easily disposed of on a prepaid contract if need be. Use that number for your flyer, and here's the reason why. Just last week, Renegade Search and Rescue also put out a notice that there was a specific 061 number that was contacting people listed as missing people or missing persons, demanding money out of them. So there's the first thing. There's an extortion racket that is starting to build up where they are preying on the vulnerability and the emotional aspect of a missing person. Now, you know, Dawn didn't actually specify categorically what type of method of extortion was being supplied. For example, it could have been, look, I know where your brother is, I know where your mother is, I know where your child is, but you'll have to pay me X amount of money before I give you that information. Or how much are you going to pay me if I tell you where your missing loved one is, that kind of thing. Well, that is something that, you know, most parents and most adults and guys, members of the CPF, administrators, dispatchers, ask yourself, how would you react to that? And if I'm wrong in what I'm about to say, well, then I apologize. But I can tell you now that if it was my loved one and some idiot phoned me and told me that, I would be so livid. I'd flick him upside down, or her for that matter, and I'd put the phone down and block the number. And that would, in essence, be the end of it. But it doesn't stop there. As I've said to several people that I've had this conversation with, a case I had 2 months ago, the mother in Gordons Bay lost her adult son and daughter-in-law up here in the Witpoortjie area. She came up, spent 3 weeks looking for them, unfortunately couldn't find them, went back to Gordons Bay. When she got back to Gordons Bay, she had to go in and have some procedures done, and she decided to put it out on Facebook that she was looking for her family, and she gave a name and telephone number. At that point, I made contact with her, wanted to find out if she'd gone through the procedure of opening a case, missing persons case. Fortunately, she didn't have any problems. She opened the case in Gordons Bay. They told her they'd transfer it to Roodepoort. Unlike several police stations and precincts where they claim 48 hours or go and do a flyer and come back here in 24 hours, or no, you've got to go to another police station to open a case, etc. Besides those difficulties, she had done what she needed to do, but she didn't have the OB number on her. So I put it out. I got her permission, and we in actual fact prepared a different document just for the local JOC group and one of my own dedicated emergency groups. And we put it out there, and one of the guys called me and said, look, I think I know where this guy is. I said, that's fantastic. And no sooner had I put the phone down with him, and the mother phoned me hysterical. This must have been about 2 or 3 hours after the last contact I had with her. And she told me she received a telephone number from an unknown number. The guy claimed he was from a particular country and that they were busy raping her daughter-in-law and they were torturing her son. And they had sent through the details, banking details, and she had to pay money for that, for them to stop that and to release them. She went ballistic. She lost it. Emotional as ever. She put the phone down, didn't know what to do. On the verge of a nervous breakdown, she got a telephone call a minute later from a different number. And this time they told her, look, we've killed your son and we will continue to rape your daughter until you pay the money. Now you got a choice. At which point she then also put the phone down and made contact with me. And I want to end up with this on this voice note. You as a parent, you as an adult, you as anybody, how would you feel if that happened to you? Just ask yourself that question and meditate on that before you continue with the VNs. All right, continuing with voice note 65, 2121, 5th of November 2024. I ended up and I asked you to consider how you would feel if you were told certain things about, as an adult, if your loved one was being subjected to torture or even rape. And it is on that basis I'm going to ask you, would you be prepared to put your telephone number on a flyer and put that out in general circulation? Because if you do, here's what I say to everybody, like I've said to the administrators in the previous voice notes. If you are not prepared to stand up in a court of law and be accountable for the messages that are posted on the group, or if you are not prepared to stand up in a court of law and defend yourself on what you don't post on a WhatsApp group, then you don't deserve to be an administrator. And I want to say to every single group member, every administrator, every single dispatcher, every NGO, every member of an NGO, and even directly to every CPF member, if you are prepared to put your telephone number out there, then by all means share somebody else's numbers. But if you are not prepared to put your telephone number on a flyer in that circumstance and subject yourself to that kind of abuse, then why would you in actual fact allow or be part of the chain of distribution by sharing some other mother's telephone number? Do you think it is justified to share that telephone number and quite possibly because or part of that mother receiving such threats or abuse telephonically? That is the question that I would like you guys to seriously consider. And when it comes to missing persons of this nature, look, to be quite honest, within a very closed WhatsApp group. So, for example, if you've got a joint operations center group with key role players and no members of the general public, and a parent comes to you and says, my child is missing, or a caregiver comes and says that the person I'm responsible has gone missing, look, the parents, legally speaking, in terms of the Children's Act and the Child Care Act, the Children's Act makes reference of no less than 58 times in the best interest of the child. Therefore, it is imperative that they raise the alarm as quickly as possible. But remember what I said in the beginning. We need to get the information out as quickly as possible, not just get the information out. So we've got to pause somewhere along the line and decide whether we give out a mother's telephone number or whether we in actual fact take it upon our own personal telephone number and then distribute the information. Or we put it out on a closed group. So for example, within the CPF group, or within, in my case, a disaster relief cert group, where I've only got my registered volunteers that I have full legal control over, then I could put the information out there and maybe possibly even share the mother's telephone number. Because then my members are subject to the POPI Act, where they are not allowed to share that information into the public domain. Do you see the difference between just putting it out and putting it out? And that is where we now need to start looking at things in a completely different manner in terms of what we are doing. And as I said, as a CPF or an NGO, but then you've got to be a registered organization. You have to be registered as a non-profit company, or you have to be registered as a non-profit organization with the Department of Social Development, or you must be an association that has been given a juristic responsibility or a juristic persona through an established constitution, a club constitution or whatever, or like the CPF constitution. Because then you've got control over the information that you do. So on the final voice note, I quickly want to run through the correct procedure as best I can, and then I'm going to end off this segment, and hopefully it'll help everybody that listens, NGOs, CPFs, admins, dispatchers, whatever you want to call yourself, even group members, not to celebrate your ignorance, but to in actual fact allow yourself to be open to being educated and to think a little bit further for the benefit of the parents in particular, and not just the fact of let's be emotional and let's get the information out there with total disregard to the additional consequences that could occur. Because the minute that telephone number is put out there through social media, whether it's WhatsApp, Twitter, or X, or what it's called now, Telegram, Facebook, those messages are going to appear and recirculate for months to come. And then that number is going to be contacted for follow-up and everything else and potential abuse. Let's move on with the final VM in this segment. All right, hopefully the last segment on the missing persons training module for the admin and dispatcher training, voice note number 66, 5th of November, on the 21st of 21st, listen to me, I've been distracted yet, 2127. is the time, 21 hours, 27 minutes. Okay. It's quite simple. A person comes to you and says to you, you're a member of the CPF or an NGO or a group administrator. What do? I need help. I've got a missing person. First thing you do is, if you are not an NGO, a CPF or otherwise, give them a telephone number of the CPF chairman or of the NGO, whether that be VCSI, Renegade Security, Renegade Search and Rescue, or any other organization or individual that might assist. Many people have shared my telephone number, and then we will guide them through the process. So in order for you who's listening to this voice note, the process is quite simple. The minute that parent, caregiver, family member, in actual fact, makes contact with somebody that's prepared to assist, the first thing they have to do is ensure that they provide information they are authorized to provide to that person, especially if they are an NGO of their own accord, or if they are in actual fact another institution like a college, a school, or whatever the case might be. Parents of children have full right and access, full rights and accountability to share the information that they want. But like I said, in the best interest of for their own protection, rather don't let them share their own information. If they do say to you, we're going to put it out on Facebook, say to them, hold back. I think okay, I'm just waiting. Yeah, there we go. Now it's working again. Rather ask them not to put their own information out. They can give you, if you are a CPF, they can give you relevant information, share a photograph, provide the last known, a description of the child, any other vulnerabilities, any medical conditions. But I'll share some flyers with you guys that you can utilize in order to educate yourself further. Now, as soon as that happens, you must tell them they have to go down to SAPS and open a case. Advise them they can go to any SAP station. There's no waiting period at all. If the cops give them a problem, they must ask specifically for the station commander. They must insist on that, and they must take the name, rank, and serial number of the policeman that's attending to them. And they need to complete the necessary forms. But they must get the OB number before they leave the police station. That is critical and crucial, that every parent, every family member, every caregiver gets that OB number before they leave the police station. And if the policeman tell them you'll get a CAS number tomorrow or whatever, they can tell them they can come tomorrow. But the OB number is crucial, especially when it comes to children, so that they can get this information out to the guys that create the recognized flyers. Then the parent must make contact with the organization to do the flyers, and they must provide the information, and that parent must give that organization the authority to share the flyer. In the same way that parent can give the CPF chairman permission to share a flyer, at which point all of that can go out, and it can go out far and wide. And that's basically it in closing. So guys, there's really not much to consider here. The biggest problem that I personally experience speaking to people in cases like this is the fact that they have become emotional, to the point that I also become emotional, because then I get peed off due to the, call it attitude, that has been put out there. That attitude is the emotional side that most people, I'm not saying everybody, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not accusing anybody. I understand where it's coming from. But you, as an NGO, as an administrator, as a dispatcher, as a CPF member, you have to act in a professional manner. If your chairman strips his glory and flukes somebody upside down, that is the chairman's right. He will suffer the consequences. But it is not your right as a member of an NGO or other association to do that. You've got to act in a professional manner. And ladies and gents, I want to close it off on this particular voice note. If anybody does have any questions, yeah, well, it can be raised and filtered back to me. Thanks all.